Sure.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Great, and we're live. Today we're joined by Sibel Ataogul, a lawyer and for Amnesty International contesting Bill 21 and spokesperson for the Anti-Racist Decolonial Committee within Quebec Solidaire. We're also joined by Nora Loreto. She's a journalist and editor. In the last episode of Local 514, I looked at how secularism involves racism within Law 21 and Bill 62. So is secularism possible without racism? Sibel, can you tell us a little bit about the Anti-Racist Decolonial Committee, which is a group of members within Quebec Solidaire to act on the issues of systemic racism within the party and in our society?
Yes. So actually, our committee in Quebec Solidaire, we call them collectives. So it's basically a group of members that got together. We got together very organically. We didn't get together to form this committee. We got together so that our party would adopt a progressive position on Bill 21. We wanted our party to oppose Bill 21 in its entirety, and there was a proposal to accept it in part for for certain jobs like police and for judges and for the National Assembly, but let the teachers off the hook. And we said that's, you can't choose who you're going to discriminate against. So we wanted them to have a progressive position, and it was very organic because it was members from across Quebec and not just in Montreal that were mobilizing on their own. And we got together at our National Council, which is one of our two big General Assemblies that we have, the smaller of the two. And that's where we all got together and we said, okay, and our mobilization worked. Quebec Solidaire adopted a complete opposition to Bill 21 at like 91% at the meeting. So we were very happy, and we decided to, some of the people that were in it decided to say, well, why don't we become a collective within the party? A collective is recognized by the party if you have at least 10 members. And it's kind of like an interest group within the party, kind of like, socialists within the NDP or other parties like that aim to push for certain agendas. And at the time, there was another collective called Secularism Collective, which I felt was badly titled, obviously, that were really, really, pushing a very Islamophobic agenda in the party. So we felt, it's very important for us, even though we won the debate. So that's how it sort of got started. And yeah, and it's still going on.
Great, thank you so much for explaining that. So Nora, I know you've been organizing around anti-Islamophobia, and you've also written a bit about Law 21 and its negative impacts before including Islamophobia and sexism. Could you tell us a little bit about your writing and your involvement in anti-Islamophobia?
Sure, yeah, my involvement goes back many, many, many years. First time I was really involved in the fight against Islamophobia was around graffiti that was left on the prayer space at Ryerson University in 2004. And from that, I was peripherally and then very much involved with something that was called the Task Force on the Needs of Muslim Students, which was the first study of Islamophobia in Canada. And it specifically looked at Islamophobia on campus, which was a really amazing, it was a really amazing initiative that for me as a white, Catholic raised kid, and very Catholic, actually, I worked for the Catholic Church when I was 17 and 18 as an organist. It was very, very important and very formative, actually, for how my political kind of evolution happened. And so when I came to Quebec City from Toronto, it was a major culture shock in a whole bunch of different ways. And one of those ways was seeing how Islamophobia was so present within the political discourse. And so, like Sibel, I was actually also involved in fighting for Quebec Solidaire to change the position or to take the position that was taken against Bill 21. And through that organizing in Quebec City, it was very interesting because people genuinely changed their position on the question of the Bouchard-Taylor Commission, on the question of whether or not people with members of the state in positions of so-called coercive authority, if they should have the right to wear a religious symbol. And I come from Toronto, where there have been police officers who've had the right to wear a Sikh turban with the insignia of the Toronto Police for a long time, for not my, probably at this point, most of my life. That was a struggle that I remember from when I was a kid. So it was very obvious to me, but it was also very clear that this was an issue that had to be debated among the first debate that I was involved with among folks within Quebec Solidaire. And it was really interesting because there was many assemblies that I attended. There were assemblies for my riding, there were assemblies for the region, and there was real debate. People had never really considered the questions of white people within the party had never really considered questions of how Islamophobia was intersecting directly with the secularism discussion, even though, it had been clearly happening within Quebec society for more than a decade at that point. So once the decision was taken at that National Council meeting, which was in Quebec City, actually, at the end of March 2019, my focus, and a lot of the folks in Quebec City, our focus turned more to the struggle against the bill itself. And so outside of the party, and how do we organize around the National Assembly, which is right here, and raise this issue, especially in a city where the population is so white, and where it's very easy to live in Quebec City as a white Francophone Quebecer and not have any contact with someone who's Muslim, which is not my experience, but I've certainly met people who that's how they grew up here, and that's what life in Quebec City was like. And then from the perspective of a journalist, it's been very interesting because I come to Quebec with external eyes, right? I'm not of Quebec society. I've lived here for a while. It's coming on 9 years. But to explain what this struggle is about, and to do it in English, which often means my audience isn't Anglophone Quebecers, but it's actually tends to be Anglophones within Canada, right? And trying to describe the combination between the role the church played, the Catholic Church played for so long in Quebec society, and the domination and the injustices perpetuated by the Catholic Church, but then explaining how, what's the departure between that experience, and then using that experience to perpetuate Islamophobia. And so that's been more of what I've been doing since those days in 2019. Of course, things have gotten a little bit difficult with the pandemic, but there has been a lot of really great organizing in Quebec City that's happening as well. And it's organizing. There's organizing that's led by women who are involved with one of the mosques in town. There's organizing that's led by one of the regroupements that we have of anti-racist organizations in the city. And things really have cooled off because of the pandemic. But before the pandemic, it was really, these questions are, how do we keep this issue alive within Quebec society now that the bill has passed in this law?
Thank you so much. I definitely relate to what you're saying about kind of having to explain secularism and the history in Quebec. When I was putting together the story, I was kind of struggling with that, because I think a lot of people outside Quebec don't quite understand that, and especially with Quebec's history. Yeah, so thank you for explaining that. So how can a secular society benefit citizens and, overall just everyone, but specifically secularism that is not rooted within racism? Sibel, if you wanted to start.
Well, yeah, but I think that what happened throughout this debate, and it's not just in Quebec, we talk about Quebec and Quebec's particular history, but I think the rest of Canada, Islamophobia is also rampant. It's just not as openly state sanctioned as it is here in some places, but it's still a problem. But I think that the issue is what I think the fight that Nora and I are in is a fight for secularism. I think there's a vast misunderstanding that's being perpetuated by this government, by the Legault government, on what secularism is. Secularism is really, the non-involvement of the state in religious affairs. It originally, when we talk about laïcité, it's the separation of the state with organized religion. So your state is not involved in religion per se. And so the state is supposed to not have, religious involvement and not take decisions based on religious precepts, but it's also supposed to have an attitude of neutrality towards the religion that is within its constituents. And so what we're asking for is basically secularism. We're saying the state itself cannot have a state religion. And that also means the state itself cannot discriminate or not allow people to have their own religion or to have religious symbols. So it's really about an attitude of neutrality towards religion within the constituents, within the public, within the people who are living in Quebec. So ultimately, to me, it's, you cannot have secularism if you have Islamophobia. I think if you have Islamophobia, what you're saying is it's not a secular state, and there's a history behind it when you come to a place like Quebec. This history of Islamophobia in a place like Turkey, where I'm from, is different. But Islamophobia in Quebec is really, and Nora can maybe speak to that after, because she was raised Catholic and she was raised in those traditions. But it comes from a tradition that we call, Judeo-Chrétien. It's a Judeo-Christian tradition of, the state religion was Christianity, it was Catholicism, and people fought against the oppression of that. But all the other aspects of it are still very much in line with this government's values. We have a prime minister who believes in God. We have a prime minister who is Christian, and we have members of his government who think, well, that's just the norm. We don't really want to see anything else. So I feel like it's the opposite. I feel like if you want to have, a secular state, then you have to stop Islamophobia. You can have both.
Thank you. Nora, did you want to speak a little bit on this as well?
Yeah, no, Sibel said everything that I totally agree with. I saw something today that was very interesting, a member statement from a member of Legislative Assembly in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, the province of Manitoba. And the guy's statement was he was turning 50 years old and he's finally confronting death. And this literally just happened yesterday, I think, because I saw the Hansard. And he concluded his private member statement by insisting that people then find Jesus and find peace in Jesus, because that's the way for eternal life. And I think that, like, as Sibel said, it exists all across Canada. There's really no question about that. But the way that laïcité, or that secularism, exists in the rest of Canada is so weird, because in Quebec there was the aggressive break with the Catholic Church, right? There was a moment where there was a break with the Catholic Church, right? A long period of time, right? The Quiet Revolution. And through that break there was a reckoning, right? Like it was revolutionary what happened, how Quebec shed the control of the Catholic Church. And then you look at the province right next door to us in Ontario, and my partner was educated in the secular system, in the public secular system, and said Christian prayers for a lot of elementary school. There are still prayers said, just like we would kind of make fun of Jean Tremblay in Saguenay, insisting that the prayer that the Our Fathers said at every single council meeting, there are still literal prayers that are being said in other legislative assemblies across Canada. And so this question of secularism is actually very, very important. And oftentimes what we don't talk about is really just how much of the Christian tradition continues to inform how legislative procedure happens, not just in other provinces, but also at the federal level. And so the struggle for secularism is a left-wing struggle. It is exactly as Sibel talked about. The struggle is to allow all people to express whatever religion that they want, and they have equality before the law, and they have access to the same rights. And that's the problem with Bill 21, is it literally does not do that. It literally strips the rights of people who are religious and express their religion through religious symbols. And so it's just so ironic. And so we have to also not pretend that the CAC, or the supporters of the CAC, or the supporters of Catho-laïcité, right? That really wonderful amalgamated word of Catholic secularism. I guess we have to work on a better word in English for that. They don't want secularism. What they're protecting is the literal white supremacy that embeds the system of governance in Quebec, right? It's the same kind of white supremacy that happens when you say, Francophone Quebecers, when you mean to say white Francophone Quebecers, right? Which we hear all the time as shorthand, both in English and in French. And so the struggle for secularism, we really do need to make it clear that this is a struggle to make a society that is truly equal, that it does not matter what you are wearing, and it does not matter what you believe, but you have equal access to your rights. And it's really too bad that this has turned into something that the right has been able to so effectively use, because we know that this is one of those political issues that Legault can use at any moment to get out of any kind of political scandal that he might be in, and he uses it so effectively. And it was really clear, the 2018 election, secularism did not come up very much, right? There was a couple of questions posed. Legault kind of indicated his intentions at the start, and then right off the bat, it was just this incredible attack against minority communities in this province. And that was very clearly done because he had promised a program that was to be very difficult. So, keeping in mind he got elected promising to reform long-term care. Of course, that didn't happen. And instead, it's just been maintaining his incredible popularity by appealing to a very active segment of the population that believes that they are attacked personally by Quebec changing, by Quebec not being the white Catholic place that it was in their youth or their parents' youth or in books or whatever they believe was ever the history of this province.
Yeah. And this is we're not allowed to say it, but we have a prime minister who reads books by people like Mathieu Bock-Côté, who basically espouses fascist ideologies in his writings, who talks about ideologies that like the grand remplacement. He's constantly writing about how immigrants and immigration are going to destroy, white francophone culture in Quebec. And he calls it, the demographic drowning, and he uses all sorts of words, but it's basically the same ideology behind terrorists like Christchurch killings, and you think, wow, we have a prime minister who says, read this guy's books, he's so interesting. And somehow we're not allowed to say, well, that's white supremacy. I think we lived through this with the collective in Quebec Solidaire on what we can and cannot say. And we were reprimanded by our own party on that because we said, this is about white supremacy. And it was like, you cannot say these things. And it's amazing to me. I'm like, where else could you say, yeah, I'm reading these books by this guy who's saying immigrants are going to outnumber us, which is clearly a fascist theory. And you have your prime minister telling you to read that. And then he's adopting these laws. I mean, I think at one point, we have to put two and two together. And when it comes to people talking about, and with what happened with Professor Adaran, and he said some incendiary things, I think that's his personality and it belongs to him. But I think the distinction we have to make about Quebec is not so much that Quebecers are different from the rest of Canada on that issue. I truly don't believe that, other than what Nora said about our history of having that reckoning with the Catholic Church, which is a very good history. But I think that what we have, though, is a state, we have a government reinforcing these things and telling us it's okay to discriminate. It's okay to think, that a Muslim woman wearing a hijab cannot be a judge or a lawyer like me in some legal functions. When he says that's okay, what he's telling the population is we can't trust that woman wearing that hijab to make a decision. So when we see that woman on the bus with us, we think there's something wrong with her because our prime minister is telling us there's something wrong with her. So that to me is dangerous. That's dangerous. That's what invites violence. That's what I think invites people who attack the church in Quebec. I don't think our prime minister can put his head in the sand when these things are happening and pretend that he has nothing to do with it,
Well, and if I could just say one thing to that, which is so interesting, like in 2006, Maclean's magazine had a full issue on the question of quote unquote, is Islam taking over the West? And the key article within this was written by a guy named Mark Stein, who you may or may not know, but he is also one of these proto-fascist writers who now is on with Tucker Carlson. I'm not sure what his role is on Carlson's show on Fox in the States, but Stein is like a global kind of thinker of these ideas. And it's so funny to me to see these ideas repackaged, and now arrive in the form of Bock-Côté and making itself up to the premier of the province, where in English Canada these ideas have been circulating very, very prominently for a very long time, and that is the engine of this like very aggressive, very violent far right sentiment that you can find not just in like the Yellow Vest movement and not just in like the Rebel News, but you also see it within the Conservative Party, very obviously. Jason Kenney had to absorb it into his party, and now look at how that's ending up where he's got like rogue members of his caucus who are like, COVID is fake, right? And so
Yeah,
we're seeing
yeah.
these issues really find themselves into the mainstream, and they are sounding more and more innocuous. Sybil, you mentioned the ideology of the Christchurch shooter. The manifesto of the shooter in Norway in 2011 was full of this obsessive Islamophobic writing, talking about cultural Marxism, talking about concepts that have been floating around the internet since then, like a lot, that are forming the basis of the ideology of these violent people. And I remember reading his manifesto because we were cited in it. The work that we had done at Ryerson University, the work that we had done against Islamophobia, was cited in this guy's manifesto. And of course, he killed more than 80 young activists, political activists within a party in Norway. And so like this is happening for so long, and it's finally getting mainstream expression. And yeah, as Sybil says, it's very hard sometimes to talk about it because people on the left are afraid. They don't know how to use the right words. They don't know how to defend it. They're awkward. Their immediate reaction is defensiveness because they're mostly white. And it's a huge problem.
Thank you both. Sybil, I just want to confirm, when you're saying the Prime Minister, are you talking about Trudeau or Legault?
No, I'm talking about Legault, obviously. François Legault shared, Nora might know this stuff better than me because she's in the media, but he, in his book suggestions for the libraries in Quebec, he was suggesting a book by Mathieu Bocoté, and the librarians didn't want to push for that book. So it created this debate about, freedom of expression and things. And I was like, I'm not saying everything he writes is proto-fascist. Some of it is just, pseudo sociology. And I'm being respectful, but he does have proto-fascist writings, and our prime minister is telling us to read him. To me, that was like, this is surreal. Moving away from that, that is just the most prevalent part of that kind of racism. I think the other part of it is also in things that even are acceptable for the left right now. And I'm talking about Quebec Solidaire, I'm talking about the institutional left, like the curfew. When we talk about the curfew, it's something that I'm definitely interested in taking on, but this is a measure, again, that ultimately attacks racialized communities, poor communities, marginalized communities, but ultimately it's giving the police a blank check to say, well, now you can go and fully, police Black communities harder, and you can police marginalized communities harder, and you can police Aboriginals harder, because there's a curfew. You're not supposed to be outside, and we're not. It's getting there, but it's so far only been like the extreme right conspiracy theorists who have been opposing this curfew. And this is a real problem, the curfew and other sanitary measures that I feel like, and maybe I'm changing a little bit the topic here, but I feel like they're interrelated. We have a government who's basically replacing social services with repression. They're like, well, we don't need to have better healthcare. We can just lock people at home so that they use the hospitals less. And you think, well, in the future, how is that going to pan out? And I think that too is also a problem. And I see this with Quebec Solidaire because, I've been very critical of the support of some of the members of parliament in Quebec Solidaire, or, the relative silence. And then when you look at them, you think, well, they're mostly white and they're mostly in, well-to-do, upwardly mobile neighborhoods. And, they have the means to be outside or rent a chalet or things like that. So it's like, there is a real disconnect, I think, that's happening.
Thank you so much. So Law 21 is not the only law of its kind, as Bill 62 was passed by the former provincial Liberal government in the fall of 2017. This banned those with face coverings from delivering or receiving public services. The law was suspended and the Liberal government did not appeal it, planning to instead fight for Bill 62 if they were reelected, which they were not. I know this was a little while ago, but do you guys remember maybe your first initial reaction when you heard of Bill 62 and Law 21?
I'll jump in. My actual first bill number to this whole issue was Bill 93. I don't know, Sybil, if you remember Bill 93, but this was the first time that they tried to legislate the hijab. And I heard about it as a student activist.
You're talking about the PQ?
Yeah.
You're talking about the PQ? Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Not that, like, this would have been 2007, 2008.
Oh, the liberals. Yes, yes.
So so I had been watching like the legislative evolution of trying to like basically legislate Islamophobia for a while, and of course we had the minority government of the Parti Québécois in 2012, which was like kind of a clown show to say the least, and that kind of set the stage, I thought, for what was going to be like I hoped a high watermark of like ridiculous politics, which of course the liberals then just blew out of the water. And the liberals were, in some ways, like there's an interesting, if we're going to kind of argue what's more dangerous, in some ways the liberals were more dangerous with how they were treating Islamophobia, because it was much harder to poke through the arguments that they had come up with. And the niqab has been so much more demonized within Quebec society that the liberals were like, they were sucking and blowing. They were like, people like Islamophobic people are going to love us and our base won't hate us. Use it like we focus on the niqab, right? As if the niqab is like worn by, I think at the time I had written about it, but I think it was maybe worn by 80 people in Montreal, right? And like I have friends in Toronto who are niqabis, and so that like I was not unfamiliar with women who decided to wear niqab, and so the attack on this community, on this extremely small minority of people, was just so vile. It was so vile, and it was wrapped up with a government that was slashing and burning in a way that was just so like, it felt relentless, right? Watching our entire healthcare system be restructured, watching the attacks on the public service, watching the corruption, right? The liberals are just, obviously the kings of corruption, and I felt very like hopeless by watching their decision to put up that bill. And so when Bill 21 came, I was not at all surprised. I was surprised that they hadn't made a promise like that during the election, because I recall during the 2018 election that it was more like words, right? Like, oh, we'll do something. And I was honestly surprised that they were so quick to be like, no, we're going to go ahead with this piece of legislation, because I'd hoped that, maybe we can have a breather. Of course, obviously that's a ridiculous hope, because that's not how these things work. But yeah, the way that the liberals kind of pulled, you can think about this like the Overton window, right? What's the acceptable level of restriction? And the liberals just being like, you know what, we're just going to focus on niqab. Was like, what? That like we were going in one direction, and you just managed to even like make it even more palatable to a new set of people who are liberals, who aren't even members of the Parti Québécois, aren't even supporters, in some cases detest the Parti Québécois. And now we've got an even larger base of people for the CAQ to be like, on est pas des péquistes, like everybody's inside of our party together. This is perfect. Like, you set it up perfectly for us to just take the absolute worst elements of both parties and hand a level of support to François Legault that no one has had in the province since there's been more than two parties, right? He has historic levels of support. And the liberals never, ever got the ass kicking that they really should have had over that. I mean, they didn't get the ass kicking that they deserve for so much of their program, and so that's really unfortunate. Of course, the funny thing about the pandemic is this whole idea about face coverings. We've gotten pretty used to them now, and we all have been doing very essential work with our faces covered. And so there was that little moment of comic kind of relief where you can see how ridiculous this is. And the only silver lining from that is that you have an entire generation of people who may have remembered that debate, who weren't probably pulled by it, and who've now had very formative experiences during the pandemic, that I don't think we're going to ever see politics played on the niqab specifically in that way again.
Definitely.
I mean, but I could be wrong.
Well, what was interesting to me with Bill 62 was that at the time I was involved in challenging a regulation in Montreal called P6, and we were challenging P6. This is what the Legault government, and during the student strikes in 2012, had passed Bill 78. Curtailing the right to protest, and they basically asked Montreal to do the same and asked Quebec City to do the same. And in Quebec City, we amped up this old regulation we had called P6. And there was two things that were really important at the time, as people will remember, those of you who know. It was, you have to give your itinerary to the police if you're going to be outside, and you cannot be masked during a protest. And so we fought those two things. We challenged them. I challenged it in the courts with my firm and my partner in that, Claude Saint-Amand. And I remember because when we were talking about the mask element, we had all these discussions, and I was, and at the time there were municipal politicians that are all now in Ensemble Montréal saying masks are the bad guys in the comics. It wasn't, ça volait pas haut, comme on dit, in terms of intellectual discourse. And it was really important for me and for a lot of my militant friends to be able to be masked in public and to be able to be masked. And I really felt like this is a fundamental right we have to not be identified if we're engaging in legal activities, like protesting peacefully. This is a charter protected right. And it was about, and I mean, it was about covering your face, right? And so it was very similar to niqab. And a lot of people were so happy when we won that challenge. The amount of, I did not get one piece of hate mail. It was like, you're a hero and it's amazing. And then Bill 62 comes. And part of Bill 62 is don't wear the niqab when you're giving services, which is ridiculous. We'll get to that. Even as a lawyer, I could plead with my face covered. I don't think it would change anything. But part of it was you can't use services like take the bus with your face covered, or let's say be in a municipal pool with your face covered, or, and people were like, this is so reasonable. Yeah, of course. Why should people have their face? And all of a sudden, not necessarily my super left-wing friends, but people I knew that were quite social democrat type people that were like, but c'est normal. And I was like, why do I have to show my face? And, and I thought, but you guys were with me when I was fighting this on behalf of student protesters. And now you're against us. And what is the difference between the two? It's Islam. There's no other difference between the two. The difference is Islam. The difference is racism. And the difference is colonialism. Because white supremacy is really built on colonialism. And this is about, there's something very strong about this in Quebec. And I think it also comes from French colonialism, the French colonizing these North African countries, seeing them as sort of the savages that they would civilize and that they would bring into Western society. And we saw that a lot in Turkey too. We weren't colonized, but so that's what's really interesting to me about Bill 62, because as Nora said, it was like, and even my most progressive people I was talking to, they were like, yeah, but Sibel, you wouldn't defend the niqab, would you? Like the niqab, it's awful, the niqab. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't want to always show my face. I don't understand why you can force me to show my face. And it was like, and at the time I remember, I don't want to like take too much, but at the time I remember a lot of the things people were like, yeah, but when you're cross-examining a witness, there's even a case on that, a woman who wanted to be examined and cross-examined with her face covered. And they were like, you need to be able to see the person and everything. And I was like, well, maybe in a very specific, like criminal murder investigate, but other than that, I mean, I plead things, not always, but I have pled things on conferences on the phone. I've pled motion. And with the pandemic now, it's a free-for-all. So the issue is, I think with Bill 62 was, like Nora said, you're going after the niqab because that's such a violent image for people to grasp onto. But ultimately, it still always goes back to Islam, because we're okay with covering our faces for other purposes.
Thank you so much. So currently we're waiting for the judgment on whether Law 21 is constitutional or not from Justice Marc-André Blanchard. So outside of the courts, I mean, what can we do? What needs to happen to push our current government towards secularism that is not tainted by racism, sexism, or Islamophobia?
It's a question of how do you move society? How do you fight racism within society in general? I think that we need to see Bill 21 as part of the struggle against racism and white supremacy in general. And I think a lot of people do who are involved in the struggle understand how it's very clearly connected to those other forces. But we have to we have to fight those social forces the way that we fight anything else, which means organizing. It means creating groups, informal or formal, that are able to bother politicians. And the one thing about François Legault, which is good, is that he is a true populist. He believes things to the point of him losing support. And so that means that the best tactics that we have against him are the tactics that bring us closer to chipping away at the support that he has. It's very difficult in a society that is as imbued with white supremacy and racism as a post-colonial society can be. But that's just that's our work. That's the same thing as it's the same question as how do we fight, police brutality, and how do we fight economic inequality and economic apartheid, and how do we fight injustice that Indigenous people face every single day in every single aspect of interacting with the state. And so all of the ways that we normally try and fight and win, and understand that these things take time. That you can't unlodge a prime minister who's got 75% rating, let's say. I'm not sure if it's at 75% right now, but it's certainly not far from that. You can't get rid of him in 6 weeks. You can get rid of him in 2 years. You can get rid of him even in 1 year. It's totally possible for there to be a sea change in opinion, but we have to keep pushing on this. And it takes the courage of people who challenge the law directly. It takes the courage of people who hold the positions, who wear religious symbols, to stand up to those structures directly. And those people need huge networks of support behind them to help them be able to do that. And it takes people like me who do not wear religious symbols and who can blend in with society until we talk, and actually be able to bring this issue to people who have never thought of it, who might have a latent agreement with the law because it sounds scary. I hate religion, and because the arguments for secularism, for true secularism, are good arguments, and do the education piece. Because as I said at the beginning, I have never been involved in a struggle like this, where I literally watch people's minds change on a floor of a general assembly. And that was and I'm not just talking about like the main debate that Quebec Solidaire had. I'm talking about all of the other assemblies that we had before. And I'm talking to people of all ages, mostly older. I mean, the younger people in Quebec City, we didn't have much of a huge struggle within people on the left, which is good. But the left needs to sort this shit out because we are not great, as Sibel has said. And that passes through action and education and organizing, just like all of our other social struggles do.
As for me, well, I think Nora said a lot, but so I was in the case. I was an intervener representing Amnesty International. My partner at my firm was an intervener representing the Public Service Alliance of Canada, a rare union who intervened. So I was very proud of them for that, along with the Fédération Autonome de l'Enseignement. And we're waiting for the decision. I'm very excited to see the decision. I as a lawyer, as an activist, and as a person, I think the courts are ultimately always going to be a reflection of the power structures in our society. So to me, it's like we use it like we use everything else. We don't have a choice. So it's one of many, many, many methods. But to me, this law is discriminatory. And whether or not another, white judge on a court says so or not, it's not going to change my mind. Legal principles and the legal aspects of this can be very different, right? So Legault used what we call a clause non-obstant, notwithstanding clause. So that has an impact on what we can do legally. We'll see what the courts say. There was a lot of very interesting creative arguments around it. But while the decision will come, while we wait for the decision, I think there isn't anything very different to do. When the decision comes, win or lose, we have to be able to say, this isn't what defines us. Like, there is a right thing to do. And I mean, as a lawyer, I'm a litigator. I've been pleading for 17 years. I have won and then lost and then won and then lost. Sometimes the same case as I move up, and the best example is Gabrielle Nadeau-Dubois' own case. I was involved in that case, and we lost at the Superior Court, we won at the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, we won as well. But it was like, it changed. These are people. And so I think we have to be able to say, yes, the courts are useful. Yes, we'll use them, but they're actually incredibly debilitating. It's an individual struggle. It's not very good for our collective struggles to rely on the courts. Other than that, what should we do? What I would say is, for the people watching, because this is Concordia University Television, on a more practical aspect, I think we have time on our side. I think the future is secular. I'm not just saying that as a great party slogan, even though I now want to found a party on that, but I think the future really is secular. I think younger people do not give a shit about what people are wearing. Younger people, I think, and without speaking for all of them, but I'm in my early 40s, but I think people that are younger than us that I interact with every day, they really want to save the environment. They see the bigger picture a lot clearer than a lot of us and older people do. They're like, while you guys are fighting about, what you're going to let women wear and what you're going to do to Muslim people, the planet is burning and people are dying, and it's a colonialist ecological disaster. It's not just an ecological. So the analysis from younger people who are in university right now, or CEGEP, or high school, or they're so beyond that. And I feel like we just need to hold down the fort till they get in positions of power. I have a lot of, maybe too much faith, but I have a lot of faith. And for the people watching, I think you guys are just being there, supporting your sisters that wear hijabs, supporting your sisters that wear the niqab, your brothers that are wearing the kippas, being there for them, giving them space, just like we need to do this for Black people and Indigenous people. We weren't able to do it today. Actually, we have Eve Torres, who's a spokesperson for our group. She couldn't make it tonight. She wears, she covers her hair. She's Muslim. But I think it's important to give the space. And, like Nora said, you have to organize and everything. But also, this is going to sound so patronizing, and I'm not doing that, but I did it. I talked to my parents. I was raised in Turkey, immigrated here when I was 10, by communist parents who were anti-religion, My mother, it was a huge struggle. I myself wasn't very happy about the hijab for a long time. I changed my mind, as Nora says. And then I talked to my mom about it. I talked to my dad about it. And they saw that this was about racism. This wasn't about secularism. This was about communism. This was about racism. And I think it's important to challenge. It's not fun, but now family reunions are on Zoom, so you can just kind of bugger off if it gets too heavy, but you can challenge them, and you can challenge their support for the CAC, and you can challenge their support, or for the liberals. That's the other thing. Stop voting liberal. Tell your liberal voting parents. I'm saying this, like, this is Concordia. Let's be honest. I'm from Pointe Claire. We know what's going on. They're voting 99% liberal. Stop voting liberal. Liberals are anti-immigrant. They don't care about immigrants at all. They have done so much more than all the other parties that came after them, and more insidious and more economic destruction for immigrants and poor people and Black people than anyone else. So if I could be practical, don't vote liberal. Don't vote CAC. Don't vote PQ. You know who to vote for. Don't vote if you're going to vote for those parties. That's what I would say. Organize. Help your friends out who are wearing religious symbols. Hold these kind of panels and challenge fascism, everywhere you see it. Even if it's your parents, like, challenge it assertively and kindly, but challenge fascism. That's what I think young people should do. Because time is on our side. I think when you're going to come, we're going to be much better off. But we still have to hold down the fort till you get here. So,
thank you. That's very good advice. I don't know maybe how much you can say on this, but in terms of the collective, following the decision we're waiting for from Marc-Andre, what are the next moves for the collectives?
For our collective is working on many different campaigns. So we work on Bill 21 constantly, holding panels and joining in things. Our members, like Thibault Camara, who's our coordinator, is in Le Québec, c'est nous aussi, for immigrants and young immigrants. And for Bill 21, obviously for the collective, we're waiting for the decision in anticipation. But we're working on a lot of other campaigns, like Defund the Police, which is a huge campaign, because all of these laws ultimately, get enforced by repressive arms of the state everywhere. So as a lawyer, my job, I take on cases to fight the repression so that the people, the militants who have the minds and the ideas, can occupy the spaces. That's why I fought P6. That's why I fought the highway security codes, dispositions on protesting. And that's why I'm fighting Bill 21, because I want access to these spaces. So I think our collective is going to continue to do that. But I think the number one thing our collective is going to try to continue to do is fight racism and systemic racism within Quebec Solidaire, because it's there. It is a huge problem in our party, like it is in every other party. And we had MPs making derogatory comments about the Chinese, and we had MPs using the N-word in their publications. So we had to go out, inside of our party, we are currently doing an audit on systemic racism, but our party institution refuses to include the employees of the party in the audit. So the people we actually pay and give jobs to, they don't want us to audit to see if there's a systemic racism problem in the access to employment for Quebec Solidaire. So that's a huge fight, and that's what we're going to continue to work on. And also for the party to actually give full support to racialized candidates, to disabled candidates, and to candidates who wear religious symbols, because we haven't had that in the past, and we think it's time.
Thank you so much. I know I'm backtracking a little bit, but Nora, in an article you wrote in 2019, you mentioned how this law disproportionately affects women, as 75% of Quebec public school teachers are women. And, you know, in the media, we see a lot of, when we're talking about Bill 21, the focus on Muslim women. Could you tell me a little bit about this law and sexism within it?
Yeah, well, I think maybe because we've covered so much of the way that this law has does it interact with other oppressions, I think that that's probably the most important message, is to see Law 21 not as a struggle to give someone who wears hijab the right to be a cop, let's say, right? Or to give someone the right to be a teacher, but it's actually a way bigger struggle than that. It's really fighting these vestiges of the foundation of Quebecois society, right? It's fighting that white supremacy built on colonialism, right? Again, like we're a society that was built on top of destroying the religious practices that had existed on this territory for time immemorial, right? These are things that are still present with us today. And if we don't understand Bill 21 in the context of the history on which Quebec has been built and then continues to grow, then we're not going to be able to get at all of the issues that this issue, and that, you know, other issues like police brutality or whatever else, that they're all connected, right? They're all connected. And, you know, it was interesting hearing Sibel's conversations about like young people being like the future, and they're going to do really good work. I feel that as well, and I think that that the most important thing that we could be doing right now is to make sure people do understand these connections. And one of the problems with Bill 21 is that it's so narrow that it can be hard to make people care about it, right? It's not the environment. It's not something that touches literally everyone. It's very few people, very few positions, very, you know, like, you know, you can leave the province, you can become a teacher in Ontario, who cares, right? And so it is a very difficult issue to mobilize on. And I've certainly felt that when we have our actions in Quebec City on Bill 21, they look very different than our actions on violence against women, for example, right? Or on pretty much any other issue. And it can be very isolating. I know that a lot of the Muslim women here who've been organizing feel very much like, where's the support? Why are we not getting, you know, the crowds that we might get for a rally that's just against racism, for example? But I think that the pandemic has really changed things. The question that I have that we cannot answer right now is, what does activism look like after the pandemic? Because, you know, as we will get this decision probably during the pandemic, and so that will be, we get the decision, then we figure out what's next. But
just an aside, we're supposed to get it like March or April. We're supposed to get it very soon.
Right. Yeah. And
that's what he said.
Those vaccines are not coming that fast, right? And so we have to take a moment to think, okay, you know, at least like all of the activism I'm involved in Quebec City right now is in a bit of a holding pattern. We're still like, we cannot plan for 6 months ahead. We don't know what 9 months ahead are going to look like. We don't know what this event that we do every single year is going to look like. And so we're not able to plan for anything in the future. And that's, you know, obviously it's because of the pandemic, but it's also because we do not know what the world will look like when we get out of this, right? The third wave is so destructive and so brutal. I mean, Quebec City has never had this many cases before. And we've gotten to a point now where people are like literally afraid to go outside because of how much COVID is in the streets. And the way that our government is going to react to this is going to change the popularity and is going to change the way that they're able to maneuver on other issues. And so then how does Bill 21 used again by the CAC in those conditions? And how much are we able to make those connections such that if we're having a massive rally against police brutality, that we also are able to talk about Bill 21, or people understand the connection between that kind of organizing and organizing on something like Bill 21. And who knows, right? Who knows? The world that is being built right now, the world that 2022 is going to be, is up in the air, and there are strong right-wing forces that are really fighting to make sure that it is their world, that it is a world where we see incredible repression. We see the repression that we experience right now continue into, like, normal times or peace times or whatever you want to call non-pandemic times. And it's also a moment where, like, average people have realized that the system is completely fucked, that there is, like, incredible understanding that, wait a minute, this is all a lie, everything is a lie. And so then how do we start talking about Islamophobia in a world where, wait a minute, I was also told that I had healthcare. I was also told that I had civil rights. I was also told that that the government cared about me. It's like, well, they don't care about your grandma. Like, they didn't care about 10,000 people's grandmas, right? And so we're actually entering a very fertile moment of activism that is going to be underpinned, and the engine of it, I think, will be young people, but the opinion change. It's that we are in a moment of a sea change of understanding the role of the state, and it is up to us to make sure that people land in the right moment and not the moments that are created by the folks like Bocote or whatever other shithead proto-fascist writers.
Like, I know we're getting to the end of it, but that really makes me think, like, it's important to, one thing that I found has worked for me, at least for things like Bill 21 that are quite narrow, Bill 62 even more, is to make the link with other struggles. Like, for example, I think to make the link with the feminist struggle, when you talk about something like Bill 21, to say, there is an aspect of this that's about a woman's or someone who identifies as a woman, their right to, wear what they want on their body and to control their body and to show or not show their body, and to make the link between this kind of law and the kind of law that says, well, you can't be topless, but your husband can on a beach, it's like, or making the link between the fact where I say, okay, guys, but if we support, violations on our right to cover our face, well, it can affect us as activists later on. They're gonna get in with religion because it's easy to do, but then it's going to become more and more repressive. So I feel like it's important to make those links, and the same thing with defund the police, making the links with repression of sex workers and and repression of indigenous activists and how and anti-Black racism, because ultimately it seems really big when we say that. So it feels like when you're listening to us, maybe you're like, oh, this is so much, like how can I deal with this? But the good thing is it's like a string, and if you pull it, you can get it all undone if you make the connections, So yeah, I'm very hopeful for after the pandemic. There are people hitting the casserole like they did in 2012 right now in Montreal against the curfew. One thing we can say about Quebec is there is hell of a fighting spirit. I saw it in 2012. I was like, this is never going to work, and they're going to kill the student movement. And I was trying to defend the student unions, and I was just crying every night. And then it was just like, the students went, fuck this, and then their parents said, fuck this. And I feel like we have that fighting spirit in Quebec more than anywhere else. So, I try to stay positive on that.
Something I just want to end on, and maybe this is a bit of a large question, but considering, the history with all the other laws that have been like Bill 21, after Bill 21, there's a possibility there might be another law like this. And what can we do to, prevent the CAC, the Liberals, whoever else from putting forward another Bill 21?
I mean, of course there will be, but you have to expect it. Like the way that the repressive laws have accelerated in this country is very important to understand. And like the 2012 was a very important year for the criminalization of dissent, of activism, of civil disobedience. And it was, it was really started actually in 2010 in Toronto with the G20. And that's where you saw this incredible mass arrest of people, right? Something that had not happened since the War Measures Act. And then 1,100 people were arrested in this Toronto in 2010. And then Sibel will probably know the number better than I, but I think 4,000 people were arrested over the course of the strikes in 2012, right? Again, like this incredible repression, and so and that's not gone away. There's ways that they've managed to use those kind of repressive tactics in labor negotiations in different parts of Canada, and we're seeing the mobilization around the G20 when they held it I'm pointing, when they halted down there in the Charlevoix, only 100 kilometers away, like it was the repression was unbelievable. I've never seen a rally of 500 people, maybe, policed with the number of military grade police officers like in my life. It was so this is getting worse. It is getting worse, and so the legislation is going to look at the United States with 36 states passing transphobic legislation that are trying to deny the rights of trans children, right? This is absolutely going to get worse. And so what we need to be aware of is expect that and be on top of what rhetoric is starting to pave the way for the next struggle. I think talking about trans rights is a really important one, because that probably will be one of the next big struggles that we will see. Maybe less in Quebec, but it's all connected. Quebec will have some sort of weird Quebec expression of this that that someone watching will probably be able to guess better than I can. And so when we're ready for this stuff, it means that we are finding our location to fight, whether that's going to be inside of a political party like Quebec Solidaire, whether that's outside of a political party within a collective or an activist organization, or within a student union or student association or whatever. The most important thing is that you're involved in something.
Yeah, I think, as somebody who has fought these laws, and that's my job in a way, we have also had a lot of, and I feel like I'm like good cop, bad cop here. I'm always like on the positive side after Nora speaks, but P6 was an expression of that oppression during the student strike movement. They wanted to limit the right to protest. 500.1 of the Highway Safety Code was the same thing. They started using it. And what we saw actually, the change that I see is they're not criminalizing dissent anymore, at least in Quebec, but what they're doing is putting regulations on dissent. So criminalizing dissent is devastating, but it's difficult. It's difficult to find someone guilty of a criminal offense. It takes years, and the burden of proof is hard and all that. What they're doing now is, okay, we won't use the criminal code. We'll use these regulations, kind of like what they're going to do with pot. But those can ticket you, crazy amounts. The tickets for P6 were like $600, and but we've managed to get rid of P6. We won in the court against P6, and with Projet Montréal, obviously not because Projet Montréal is a great party, because we mobilized like hell. We finally got Projet Montréal to get rid of it. So left-wing parties or leftish parties, they do make a difference. I think it's important to vote, but we got rid of P6. We got rid of the article in the Highway Safety Code. And I remember when I was in the Court of Appeal on P6, the lawyer for the city of Montreal was like, you can't let her win this. There'll be nothing left. It was like the biggest joke. So we can fight these things, but you know how we win these things? It's not so much legal. The Supreme Court said this on freedom of association. One of the tenets to recognize a fundamental right, strangely enough, as a lawyer, to say this is very strange, but it's true in the case law, is has the society been mobilizing this before it was legislated, and then against its repression? So we saw this with freedom of association. Freedom of association, the right to strike, collective bargaining were things that in Canadian society and elsewhere people fought for before it had any kind of legal framework. And then they tried to criminalize it. Then they tried to not criminalize it, but not give it any power. Then they said, okay, we will structure it and give it some power, but we will minimize its impact. Throughout all of these things, people fought, continued to mobilize, continued to strike, continued to fight for their right to collectively bargain. And the Supreme Court actually says, well, considering this is a fundamental right. It's part of the freedom of association. So what I'm trying to say is, strangely enough, we have to fight through repression. Fighting through repression is what makes it attack the narrative. But even for lawyers like me, it makes it easy for me to fight, to say, in P6, we had a huge debate with the first judge, and it was just surreal to me, not with so much the judge, but with the government lawyer, because they were saying that protesting on the street is not a protected activity under freedom of expression, because it was done in the street, and they're saying the street is for cars. And I remember thinking, I was like, where do you think people protest? And we actually had to file evidence, expert evidence, of a prof coming to say protests take place in the streets. We had to file that as evidence. And then when we went in appeal of the decision, thank God our appeal judge was, he actually asked the lawyer on the other side, I think I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something like, well, where's people supposed to go? Like go into the Saint Laurent? Like, where do you think people protest? Do you really think they protest on sidewalks? Like, and so one of the reasons why I think we succeeded on P6 and other cases was because we had evidence of people saying, no, this is our fundamental right and we're going to do it. So as a lawyer, I can't advocate for civil disobedience overtly, and I won't. But very few things changed because a court ordered it or because you voted for it. You know, things change because you get out there and you say, okay, you know what are we willing to lose to change things? And I think we're seeing it with Extinction Rebellion. You know, people are willing to take it very far because they want to save our lives. And I think we're going to see that with this as well. And yeah, that's as far as I can go as a lawyer, but I think you get the point.
I can take it from there. You know? It's like, yeah, we can break some laws.
You know, take a hint. Take a hint. We have to fight. All I'm saying is, you know, this is about, you know, nothing is more strong than collective mobilization. It's long and it's hard, but it's been done and it works. It works much better than going to court.
Thank you both so much. I learned so much tonight. I hope everyone else watching did. In terms of the work at the collective at Quebec Solidaire, is there anywhere we can follow along online to see what's going on?
Yes, I mean we're on Facebook. So if you go on Facebook and you type Collectif Anti-Racist Decolonial Quebec Solidaire, type us on Google, you'll find it. Among the people criticizing, among the like fascist bar, as we like to call them, you will find us, but we're mostly on Facebook. So if you look for us on Facebook, Collectif Anti-Racist Decolonial Quebec Solidaire, you will definitely find us. And you know, you have to be a member of QS to join though, so become a member.
Thank you so much. And Nora, where can we follow along with your work?
You can pretty much catch my writing. Where am I even writing these days? Well, I just wrote a book on feminism. What we need to rebuild the feminist movement in Canada, and so that's available from Fernwood Publishing. It's called "Take Back the Fight: Organizing Feminism in the Digital Era." So you should totally get that. And I'm writing for Passage these days. So if you don't know Passage, you should check out passagemag.ca or com. I don't know. I don't actually go there myself. Well, I do to read all the other articles, which are super great.
You don't read your own articles?
I
like listening to your own music.
Exactly. I really only read what I have to. And I co-host a podcast that's called Sandy Nora Talk Politics. And so at Sandy Nora, we talk about this radical stuff all the time. This week, our episode is on the NDP convention and why it was total shit, and why the third wave is also total shit.
Really?
So yeah.
Okay. We need to do I need to get on your podcast, Nora. I want to talk to you about that.
So if you're interested in that, or if you're interested in a pick-me-up episode, listen to the one from last week. It's much more positive.
Great. Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for watching and joining. I hope you all have a good night.
Yeah, and thanks to the Concordia students watching. I can't believe you're getting through university during a pandemic. I really admire you guys. Thanks.
All right.